Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webcast. We'll begin in just a few minutes as we wait for people to dial in. Hi, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining. I'm Susan Isham, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. First, the webcast is recorded, so we will email the recording and the slide deck to all registrants and attendees after the call. Second, you can interact with us through the widgets on your screen. So we'll answer all the questions at the end, but feel free to submit a question anytime throughout the presentation by clicking that purple Q&A box. If you do need any technical help, just click that yellow question mark button. Also, there are more resources and helpful tips on the other buttons as well. And just a quick note about Refinitiv. You may already know us. We were formerly the financial and risk business of Thomson Reuters, and our team presenting today are all part of Refinitiv, which is one of the world's largest financial market data providers. If you are interested in learning more about us, what we provide, and what differentiates us from other providers, you can go to refinitiv.com. And as a quick introduction, I'm Susan Isham. I manage the agriculture content at Refinitiv, and our presenters today are the head of weather research, Tom Walsh, and senior weather analyst, Isaac Henkes. And now I'll hand it over to you, Tom, to kick off the presentation.
Thank you, Susan. Appreciate it. Hopefully everyone can hear me well. I hope everyone is doing well in these times. Good morning, good afternoon, evening, wherever you are all calling from. The agenda is listed here. We've got a fairly similar structure to the webinars that we have done in the past. So if you have joined us before, welcome back. If you are new to these types of webinars, we'll definitely take you through a bit about what we do. And that's how we'll kick things off in the agenda. Who are we and what do we cover on the weather side? We'll then move into an ENSO update. That's El Nino Southern Oscillation. What phase are we in? Is La Nina on the way? And what are the potential global impacts moving into early next year? Following that, Isaac will also take us through the various weather outlooks that we have recently put together. Take us through an update on the tropical season, which has been quite active as of late, especially around the U.S. Some long-term looks at South America weather into the next year. How will the next the current India monsoon season end? And then finally, a look at our long-term outlooks for the winter in the Northern Hemisphere. And then before passing it back to me, Isaac will also take a look at the relevant impacts on the agriculture and energy spaces. And I'll kind of wrap things up with some of our new weather tools and what our roadmap looks like through the end of the year and some of the new content that you can expect from us. And as Susan mentioned, we'll wrap up then with a Q&A. So as we run through the slides, please keep those questions coming along and we'll address them as much as we can at the end. All right, so let's move on into the team introduction. So who we are, this may be a repeat to some of you, but essentially our weather research team consists of meteorologists and analysts and experts in anything weather related essentially. So you see the list of the primary folks in the group that's listed there. That page is actually available in Icon. So for the record, if you do want to reach out to us directly, our information is all there. I would also say there's a few other team members in the broader agriculture and weather team that do provide a lot of really important updates as well that aren't listed here. So everything that you see today is coming from this team. So just to be aware of that, our focus is not only in agriculture, but also in power and gas markets. So we support a variety of teams across Refinitiv in data needs, visuals, written reports, and things like that. I'll show just a couple of brief examples of where our content is. And the first is the agriculture weather dashboard. And this is essentially an app in Icon that basically shows weather data and reports and maps for 57 countries. The primary focus is on grains and oilseeds with some emphasis on soft commodities like coffee and cocoa. But outside of the written reports, a lot of the data that's processed, it's really weather centric. So it can be used across multiple markets. So I wouldn't sell it short that it's only for ags. There's a lot of information there that can be useful for really any market. And in addition to that, we also have another app called the Cross Asset Weather app. And this is just an example, one of the pages, some of our coverage earlier in the week on Hurricane Sally, which was another landfalling system that we've been monitoring across the Gulf Coast. We're working with our other teams if they have any needs from us on impacts, but this is a great example of what you would see in this particular page, and the actual map there is showing the interactive map where you can pull up quite a lot of different layers on top of one another. So this particular app is more than just agriculture, more than just anything energy based. It's really anything that can affect multiple markets. So both of these apps are available in Icon. So we'll only be able to really scratch the surface of our coverage. So if you do want to see more, please feel free to do so. Another just example, so we'll start to tie into our ENSO discussion that Isaac will take over in just a second. We do provide monthly ENSO updates on where we think we're headed, if we're headed into a La Niña or El Nino, what the impacts actually look like. So that's in our long-term outlook section. This particular outlook is for the upcoming winter, and Isaac will really take you through some of the details around that. So I think at that point, I'll pass it over to Isaac to start to go through that, and I will be back in just a bit.
Thank you, Tom. It's always a pleasure to be here sharing this time with all of you on forward weather and global outlooks. We'll make our way around the globe as we normally do. So as Tom mentioned, the beginning here we'll be discussing ENSO. We like to give you our forecast, but also give a little bit of background on what ENSO is and how do we forecast it, how can you maybe anticipate it on your own as well. And so I'll give a little bit of a background overview on that in a new way. We usually do it a little bit different every time to keep it fresh. So first of all, we'll start with our December to February outlook. That's the time period we're focusing on now. Usually we look about one season ahead. And so right now, the winter in Northern Hemisphere, December to February overall is the period of focus. And so we've been discussing throughout the whole year and in previous webinars too, as well as our insight in Icon about the potential for La Niña. It's looked like it was on the way really throughout all of 2020 by late in the year, and it does look like it's beginning now, but a little bit more on that in just a second. But this map that you're looking at now, just give a little bit of background on the maps overall. This is a sea surface temperature anomaly map. This comes from the analog years in our forecast. These are past years that we view as most similar to the current situation. This is taking those forward to the December to February period and saying that if those are a good proxy for what is to come, this is what the ocean could look like, again, with anomalies. So this is sea surface temperature relative to normal. Any type of chart like this, I'm going to be showing anomalies, and if it's a temperature chart like this one, it'll be blue to red, blue being cold anomalies and red being warm anomalies. And if it's precipitation, it'll be green to brown, with green being wet and or positive and brown being dry or negative values. So we'll have a few examples of that coming up. But just the main thing to highlight here is that we've been discussing La Nina being on the way, and this depiction from the analogs looking forward shows exactly that, developing by December to February, really developing sooner than that, but persisting through this time period. If you look inside the yellow box right in the middle of the chart, that is the official measurement region for ENSO. That's the Nino 3.4 region. And if you look there, you'll see a lot of blue shading, which shows that a fairly healthy, maybe even if weak, La Nina existing on average during December to February, which is what we're showing. So that's kind of the picture that we expect moving forward. But with that, a little bit on the background and how you can anticipate ENSO changes and how we anticipate it is, where do these cool La Nina waters come from? There are ways you can monitor that. I'm going to switch to this now and give a little background on something called ocean heat content. So ocean heat content represents waters that are beneath the surface in the Pacific Ocean. Really, the waters that come into the picture for ENSO, whether it's La Nina and cold water or El Nino and warm water, they all upwell from beneath the surface. And so if you look beneath the surface of the ocean and see, is it warm or is it cold there relative to normal, that can give you an idea about what's coming next in ENSO, and maybe down the line, maybe a few weeks, maybe a few months. But usually these changes in ocean heat content, or OHC, they lead changes in ENSO. So you can use this, and I'll show exactly how in just a moment here. So looking at the chart that I'm showing, this actually comes from our weather application in ICON. So the ocean heat content page is a page you can go to, and the chart tracks OHC anomalies. So positive values would correspond to more El Nino-like status. Negative values would be more like La Nina. And if you look at this chart, it's showing the entirety of 2020. It's showing the last year of changes, and you can look and see that last year we were more El Nino-like, and we were in a weak El Nino, and then now we've seen a decline in the OHC throughout the last year, and especially from February through really now. Overall, we've seen a decline in those values, and that has helped us have confidence that there will be a La Nina developing. The region that we measure OHC in is shown on the right. You can see these different boxes. They correspond to the different lines on the chart. But this is what we use, and if you look again, you can see that the blue arrow pointing that we're headed toward La Nina. This was true especially February, March, April, May, and then there was this little bit of an uptick in OHC. That was a time in which we had some uncertainty about whether La Nina would actually develop. Back in our insight over the summer, there was a brief time where it looked maybe a bit uncertain, and that this was part of that. We had an increasing OHC, and then it started to decline again in the last month, so we're back on track, so to speak. There is one more way to look at this. This comes not from our own sources, but from NOAA. This would be like taking the Pacific Ocean and looking at it as if you're looking at a fish tank, so a side view of the Pacific Ocean starting from the surface, looking down beneath the surface. I have placed a dashed box around the key region to watch here, but these are ocean heat content trends over the past several weeks. So these are sort of weekly values of whether it's cool or warm water, again, beneath the surface. So if you look at that black box, that's the key area where we're watching for La Nina development. And if you look over the past several weeks, you can see that there's sort of a growing in intensity of the blue shaded area. You see a deeper blue that is growing there within about a 5-week time period. And again, that's all in line with the development of La Nina happening pretty much right now. We've been there for a few weeks, but we need to stay there a little longer to solidify it. So we can see that from multiple ways, looking at the monthly values in ICON, looking at this animation of the side view of the ocean beneath the surface, you can see that the cool waters have built up in the critical ENSO region. This chart looks again from west to east across the Pacific. So that's just another way you can monitor and see that La Nina is in fact getting underway right now as long as these trends hold. Switching over to our official ENSO outlook for December to February. This is another chart that we have in ICON in our weather application under the ENSO page, but you can see there's a lot on the chart. I'll cover the key items that you might be interested in for this purpose today. The red dots show the ENSO values. Again, these are anomalies in sea surface temperature, positive and negative. And so we can see how 2020 has tracked from the red dots. Once we get to a value of minus 0.5, that's in line with La Nina. And so the red dots are the observed values, and the blue dots would be forecasted values from some of our numerical model guidance, which you can see down at the bottom. Our official December to February forecast for the ENSO value is here, shown by the white star, which is right near the La Nina threshold, which means we expect a weak La Nina to develop and then persist through December to February. We've talked about that before, but again, just confirming that is the expectation moving forward. If you look at some of the other colored lines in the chart, these are some of the top analog years from within the past decade. And so you can see how these years have tracked fairly similar to what where we're headed right now. So most of the years started either neutral or El Nino-like, and then they finished neutral or La Nina-like, and we're right in line with that. These red dot 2020 values are falling right in the middle of all the analog year values. So that all looks good. It's all tracking very well. And again, confidence has grown about a week La Nina. So what does it mean looking around the globe? We will certainly spend the rest of the time, most of the rest of the time on that in various ways, not just from ENSO, but our forecasts around the globe. But I'm just going to show a couple of global charts. Again, these are probability maps from our analog years, temperature and precipitation probabilities for either warm, cool, wet, or dry relative to normal. And so these are not absolute probabilities, but they just show the percentage of the analog years that fell into different buckets. And they can give you an idea about what might be likely. I'm just going to focus on a couple areas that we're not going to cover in regional outlooks here. So first, starting with Africa, you do see the likelihood of warmth relative to normal during December to February across the majority of the continent. So that's the Africa outlook there on temperature. And then looking at Australia, here we see a split temperature pattern from west to east with cool in the west and warm in the east. That looks very good for them relative to some past years where there were fires and droughts. This looks much better for a couple reasons. The big reason that it looks better corresponds to what we see in precipitation. So looking here at December to February precipitation anomalies, focusing first on Australia that I just covered, you see the likelihood of a wet season across the majority of the continent. Again, that's as long as that verifies well, that is great news for the area. After some recent years, it's gotten a lot better this year already through what has happened, but it looks like it will continue to be near or wetter than normal in Australia. Then looking over at Africa, a couple of things to point out here. We don't see much of a significant anomaly over West Central Africa, but you do see the potential for Ethiopia dryness. And then also looking to South Africa, you see the likelihood of high rainfall there, which does correspond to a typical La Nina. So this all makes sense. The rest of the globe we're going to cover shortly. So I'll save the rest of the globe until we get to some regional outlooks here. But before we do that, a couple other topics to cover along the way. The first one is going to be the Atlantic tropical season update. As many of you probably know already, it's been active recently. We've got a picture right here of Hurricane Sally's landfall that was as recently as yesterday. There's now Hurricane Teddy to watch, and there's a new disturbance in the Gulf of Mexico. So we're going to cover a little bit about what things look like moving forward, but we're going to kind of cover where we've been and where we might be going the rest of the season and how it all fits together. So to kick this off, we have our first poll question. So I'll read the question and the answer and discuss a little bit and wait, and then we'll see what you think. So how active do you believe the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season has been to date? Does it seem like it's been inactive, average, moderately active, or hyperactive? I will give just a little bit of time to let you answer those. And again, you know, everybody's aware of the recent activity. We've had a lot of storms. We're actually about to make it through the alphabet, but I'm just curious what your take is on how things have been so far. The season started back in June. The peak season, though, is August to October, so we're right in the middle of that now. This is a timely question along those lines. I'll wait a couple more seconds and I'll go to the result. Okay, so here are the poll results. We have how active do you think it has been, and most of you, or at least the majority, I should say, 52.5% said moderately active. And then hyperactive was the next category, the next winner at 38% almost, and then average 10%. Nobody thought it was inactive. So, so this is a great question because it's been a strange year, and we're going to show this just exactly how this is true right now. But how active is the season? It really depends how you define it. So I'm showing a couple things on this chart. Right here you can see in the blue bars, this is going to be our forecast for the 2020 season that we gave back in April, May. And this is showing percentage of normal named storms on the left and then total activity on the right. And measured two different ways. Now, in terms of the forecast, we anticipated roughly 150% of normal activity. So that's an active season. It's not hyperactive, but it's definitely more than near normal. So we expected an active season. Now, if you look at how we're tracking, the orange bars correspond to that. And this is the pace that we're on. So if we extrapolate what's happened so far to the end of the year, we are on a pace for roughly 250% of normal named storms for the season. So a lot of storms, a lot of activity that way. But if you look at the total activity, this takes into account not just the number of named storms, but also the intensity of the storms, so the intensity, but also the duration of the storm. So it's a cumulative picture of how active and how threatening the storms could have been just based on the severity. So when you look at it that way, again, we forecasted about 150% of normal, a little less than that. But so far, the total activity has come in more like 110, 120% of normal. So we're tracking a bit active so far. So you're right in the poll in terms of the majority, but not anything crazy. So nowhere close to what you would think just by looking at the named storms. And that's because a lot of the storms have been weak. There have been a couple of very impactful storms, and this picture could change because right now Teddy is churning up, and it's going to be a major hurricane, and it'll be tracking across the Atlantic for quite a while. And depending on what happens in the Gulf, there's another one coming there. So you could certainly see, I think within the next 2 weeks, this total activity pace increased quite a bit. So there's still a question about whether we'll reach hyperactive or not, but certainly it looks like we're going to head toward solidly in the active range. So that's where we're headed. And just looking at a little bit more at the forecast update and the current situation, what may lie ahead the rest of this year. So this is a picture of the Atlantic. Again, this was taken yesterday, but a lot of it is relevant now. Sally is on its way out. This showed the post landfall of Sally, but the next one to watch is Hurricane Teddy. Well, that and the Gulf of Mexico, new disturbance, but I'll start with Teddy. So Teddy is headed toward Bermuda. It's going to be a major hurricane, quite a large one. In the coming days, it'll be an impressive sight on satellite. Those of us that are weather nerds will have a lot of fun looking at it as it's just over the ocean, not hitting anything. But then it is going to head toward Bermuda. It still could hit it directly or it could miss. Depending on the track, there's still time for changes there. But likely impacts in Bermuda, not as a major hurricane, although it's expected to become a Category 4 and then weaken by the time it gets to Bermuda. But then it's likely to head northward. And right now it looks like it could hit Newfoundland. It could hit just northeast of the U.S. eventually. So there could be impacts in North America. Again, there's time for changes to that track, but it looks like maybe not in the U.S. most likely, but North America. And then the other one that's not shown here, you can see Tropical Storm Vicky. That one's likely to weaken and not be a major issue. But off to the west, not on the chart because it's developed more recently, but there is the potential and I should say likelihood now of another storm to be named perhaps today or within the next day, but another Gulf of Mexico storm. And this one could move northward in the Gulf of Mexico into next week. We'll have to watch it. It's pretty much going to stay close to stationary for a few days and just wobble around in the southwestern Gulf. But there is a chance it could head north. And so in the next week or two, we have these two systems to watch, Teddy and the Gulf of Mexico system. All our indications that go maybe beyond that, out 2, 3, 4 weeks, suggest that it's likely that maybe things will slow down a bit. The next window of hyperactivity might not be until the end of October. And if that happens, that kind of gets us near the end of the peak hurricane season, which is August through October. So if that happens, that we have an active stretch ahead and then things quiet down a bit heading into October. So that's kind of what we're thinking right now, but certainly some impacts in the next week, very possible and worth watching. Okay, switching to some of our long-range outlooks and other updates around the globe. We're going to start with South America. There's an upcoming growing season there. And so we're going to look at some of the critical time period of that growing season, which is November to February, important for Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay. And we will look at what we expect for this growing season there with impacts on commodities. So this is our outlook for South America. We anticipate the potential, starting with temperatures on the left here, we anticipate warmth in Brazil, transitioning to cool temperatures in Paraguay and part of Argentina, and then equal chances of warmer, cool, or potentially near normal across the rest of Argentina. And then switching over to rainfall, we expect dryness as a threat in Argentina, especially around Buenos Aires, the major crop regions there. And then northeast Brazil, you can see another area of potential dryness, so some soft crops impacts there. We'll come back to cover those. But looking at the area in between, though, this includes most of Paraguay and the rest of Brazil, central, west, and southern Brazil. These areas are likely to see near to above normal and maybe even very high rainfall. So this is a favorable outlook for Brazil in terms of the grains, at least. And it looks like the main threat for negative impacts would be in Argentina. This is very typical on Niña. You would expect to see the potential for dryness. Now, what could make it worse is if warm temperatures overtake Argentina. We don't expect that. They've had in South America very often in recent years this south to north split where it's cool to warm. We expect some version of that. But if Argentina trends warmer and it's dry, then it could get a lot worse there. Right now, this is the outlook for South America. So maybe some offsetting impacts, negative impacts in Argentina, positive impacts in Brazil. Okay, looking at the Indian monsoon update next. So we'll do this before we get around to some winter outlooks in the Northern Hemisphere. We're basically winding down the Indian monsoon season. So it's June to September. There's a couple weeks left here for additional changes and what could happen, but we're pretty much there. We have a good idea about how the season is going to shake out. So the next update is just to summarize what has happened this year and then again kind of set the impacts for what that will mean moving ahead. All right, so this chart that you see shows the last 40 or so years of monsoon season rainfall. The y-axis here is going to be June to September rainfall anomalies. This is % of normal. And so looking at the chart, anything between the black dashed contours would be a near normal season. Anything above that's excessive high rainfall. And then anything below that we call a failed monsoon. It's very dry. And so this is just kind of a way to look at how the last 40 years have fit into the monsoon rainfall picture. And this includes 2020. This is an extrapolation again of kind of where we are now. And if the season doesn't change much in the next couple of weeks in terms of really wet or really dry, this is where we'll sit. So if you look at this, 2020 falls just above the near normal range. So this falls into the excessive monsoon category. We're at about 6-7% above normal rainfall on the season. So 2020 is likely to be an excessive monsoon year. The last couple weeks of India rainfall, as this month winds down, are not likely to be very anomalous in either direction, so not really dry or really wet. So this is probably going to verify pretty close to what we show here. And so we can look at the last 2 years now have had excessive monsoon seasons. That was after a stretch of near to below normal rainfall for probably 5 years before that. So there were some growing concerns about long-term drying trends in India. Some of that still exists. If you see just a linear trend line, the orange dotted line that goes across the whole chart from 1980 to present, it still does show a drying trend for the Indian monsoon season. However, these last 2 years, at least are temporary relief from that. It's going to help any kind of commodities across the country there, help boost reservoir levels, 2 straight years of a lot of rain. That's a good thing there aside from any flooding impacts that have happened. So it's also taken the edge off of this dryness trend over the last 40 years. That trend may persist, it may not, but it's something to watch in the years ahead. But certainly a beneficial couple seasons on excessive monsoons last year and now this year. Now we're going to pivot over to Northern Hemisphere winter outlooks. This is going to be December to February around some of the major regions of the Northern Hemisphere. And I have to admit a little bit of bias here. Winter is far and away my favorite season. So I will promise that the bias did not make it into any of my forecasts. If it did, it would just be a cold forecast everywhere all the time. That's not too useful for you. So didn't put that into the forecast, but there's certainly a personal bias there. Looking at now in the picture you see here is a snowman that was built here in my own backyard. This was last winter. We live close to Chicago, and we had a very mild winter last year. Not a lot of snow, so that was a disappointing thing for us. However, it was an underrated winter for snowman building. We had a lot of heavy wet snows because it was so warm, and so my daughter and I perfected our snowman building, which is shown there. That was one of the last ones we built, I think probably in April or March. So we're going to work our way around the Northern Hemisphere with that. That's just to set the mood. But now we're going to start with a poll question once again. So our second poll question here. If you had to estimate how will most of the upcoming winter 2020-2021 in the Northern Hemisphere verify? So do you think overall, if you average across the different continents, North America, Europe, and Asia, do you expect it to average out to cold and dry, cold and wet, warm and dry, warm and wet, or mixed and average overall? Again, we'll give a little bit for you to answer, and then we'll get into the results and then go around the different continents in the Northern Hemisphere winter outlooks. Okay, let's see some poll results. So right now, almost 40% of you believe that warm and wet is in store. That, if it happens, will sadden me, although if it doesn't include North America, it's okay. Now looking beyond that, it's actually a pretty even divide around the rest of the categories. So we can see the next highest category is cold and dry. That's interesting. Opposite of warm and wet is the runner-up. So a very divided room we have here today. What might be ahead. And then we have cold and wet at 10%, 15, 16% mixed average. So kind of again, maybe nobody knows or don't have a strong opinion, but the winner was warm and wet. And if you just look at the long-term big picture, that's a good guess to take based on long-term trends. So I understand that guess there. So let's take a look at what's in store and see how it lines up in terms of our own expectations at least. So North America is the first stop here. And this is our outlook on temperature and precipitation, similar to what we showed for South America, you'll see for the rest of these maps. So we do expect, looking at temperatures first, a zone of potential cold temperatures across the northern U.S., especially from the Midwest westward and then into Canada. And then warm temperatures being likely along the southern U.S. and then the U.S. East Coast. So kind of a mixed picture even within North America. If you average it out, it might come close to near normal, maybe leaning slightly toward the cold side, just based on geographical impact. It's going to depend on how you measure, whether it's by population or just area. But switching over to precipitation, we expect a potentially active storm track along the northern U.S., kind of overlapping that cold area. And then there would be an average frontal zone in the northeast U.S. between the cold and the warm there, so a lot of storms tracking near that area as well. If you look at typical La Nina winters of the past, I would say most often the biggest staple can be very strong winter cyclones, winter storms. And so more so than even temperatures, you know, it can be cold or warm in La Nina. However, an active storm track is very likely most of the time. If you look at North America and the analog years, there are some fun years in terms of winter lovers that stand out, that are similar to what we're seeing right now. Some of those include 2010, 11, 13, 14, 17, 18. There's a few others that were warmer in between, but that's sort of the picture we get. There is the potential for dryness in the west coast, especially the southwest U.S. That's not great news for California if that comes true. And then the southeast U.S. Looks pretty dry there along the coast as well, potentially. So that's our outlook for North America. I will come back to some impacts again in just a minute. Hopping across the pond now to Europe and the Black Sea region. So this is winter 2021 there. We expect this is going to be a familiar picture for those of you that live there, and maybe some of the guesses even in the poll would correspond to some recent experience over there. But we do expect the potential for another warm winter and potentially very warm, in particular around the Black Sea region and Eastern Europe, surrounded by near to below normal temperatures in Western Europe and also in Kazakhstan. So warm in the middle, kind of cooler on in the west and east periphery of Europe, Eurasia. Looking over to precipitation, we expect an active storm track there along Western Europe, and then dryness focused over the Black Sea region. So the Black Sea region has had some issues with dryness throughout this year at times, and this would not be helpful to them there if it happens, but it is our most likely outcome based on our outlook at this time. So that's a bit on Europe and Eurasia. We will now finish up with East Asia. Looking at the Asia outlook, again, just moving eastward from where we were, you see on temperatures the potential for warm or very warm temperatures in most of China, right along the central part of the country is where it looks the warmest, perhaps, and then cool temperatures likely in central southern India as well as over Japan. So that's, again, our most likely outcome on temperatures. If you look at precipitation, we expect dryness as a potential from India really across much of China, and then transitioning over to a wetter pattern when you get to Southeast Asia, in particular Indonesia and Malaysia, with equal chances of above below normal in between. And then there's the possibility of significant wetness, again, along Indonesia. That's been a theme if you've been following that region of the globe. They've had very wet conditions, it might be for about a year now, across Indonesia for again, most of the last year. It's been very wet there, so we expect that to continue or be reinvigorated in the coming months. So that's our tour of Northern Hemisphere winters. We're going to finish up with some impacts and summaries here, and I will flip it back to Tom after that. So looking at around what we just talked about, and so we do expect La Niña to begin. It's kind of getting underway now, and as long as the trends hold, it'll probably just continue from this point forward through February. North America winter, we expect a potentially cold winter in central North America, cold and snowy perhaps. Again, I'd be happy about it if that happened. This is very typical of La Niña. Again, the staple of La Niña being the active storm track. So that is something to expect as we head into the winter months. The southern eastern regions of North America could be much milder and potentially drier as well. Europe and Eurasia, we expect significant warmth and moderate dryness across the Black Sea region, perhaps surrounded by near to below normal temperatures and then wetter conditions as well. Switching to East Asia, we expect a warm and dry winter in China with colder conditions focused over Japan with respect to that region. And then South Asia, the focus of being on temperatures because it won't be monsoon season anymore. Split temperature pattern is likely over India with warmth in the north and cool temperatures in the south. And then Southeast Asia, finally, we just talked about this, but near normal rainfall is expected in Vietnam and Thailand, transitioning to high or very high rainfall across Indonesia and Malaysia. So what might this mean for crops? We will finish up my section of this with crops and energy impacts. So in just a moment, but the rest of what we talked about in the tropics, again, Atlantic hurricane season, it's tracking above normal but not hyperactive. Again, it's going to be active for the next couple weeks here potentially. So uncertainty about how exactly it settles at the end of the season from future impacts, Teddy, the Gulf of Mexico and beyond, and we will be monitoring and updating that daily in our tropical pages in ICON. And then South America temperatures, we talked about warmth being likely in Brazil, near to below normal temperatures, Paraguay into Argentina, and rainfall dryness could target Argentina during November to February. Again, typical La Niña for that if that happens, and then near to above normal rainfall across much of at least the grains areas of Brazil, except in the northeast where it could be dry. Finally, the Indian monsoon, the summary of that. The monsoon is likely to finish as another excessive season, again 2 in a row. So that's what happened there. Now some agriculture impacts. We'll keep these simple and straightforward, but Northern Hemisphere winter crops, if you look at just where the where the winter crops sit around the Northern Hemisphere, there is some upside from potential warmth, even in the U.S. where we see the potential for cold. If you look farther south where a lot of the winter crops are focused, it's less likely to be cold there. But then especially looking over to Europe and the Black Sea and China, we see a warm winter ahead, which would be favorable, at least in terms of minimizing winter kill risk. The only downside really there that we could see was from the Black Sea dryness. That would be an issue more in the springtime. It's just that if it builds or lingers, it could put the crop in a bad spot as it exits dormancy, especially since it might exit dormancy early if the winter is warm. So those are some Northern Hemisphere impacts. Southern Hemisphere corn and soybeans, that'll be the focus. So South America along with maize in South Africa. We do see downside in Argentina from dryness there for both corn and soybeans. However, it could easily be offset by upside in Brazil and Paraguay and then even South Africa, which all look to be favorable. Either some combination of wet or cool weather, but especially the wet weather for Brazil. And then softs, we see upside for palm oil with another wet season in store, as long as there's no flooding issues, and then that could be a problem based on how wet it's been, but otherwise generally prefer wetness over dryness there. With the most notable downside risks for softs focused over Ethiopia from dryness. Really when we looked over again West Africa where a lot of softs are, you just don't see any strong trends at this time. So something to watch in the months ahead, but we don't have a strong lean on the upside or downside there right now. Finally, in energy, these interpreted from the outlooks as well. So U.S. nat gas could be impacted by cold temperatures over Central and North America, but the warmth along the periphery of the country could kind of minimize, at least take the edge off of the demand there, or even prevent an anomalous winter overall, especially if you average by population. So that's kind of what we see there. Nothing extreme. And then looking to Asia, the winter in China being warm could lessen coal demand for heating purposes. And then switching over to Japan and with a focus on LNG, we see, again, that being the spot where maybe a cold winter is likely within Asia. That's an issue to watch for LNG in Japan. And then high rainfall in Brazil, especially, again, central west and southern Brazil. Portions of it, Brazil hydropower would get a boost there, between stream flow reservoir levels. That would be impactful if it develops in Brazil in the coming months. So that's it from my end. I will now flip it back to Tom to bring us home.
Great. Thank you, Isaac. Appreciate the world tour here today. Before we get into the Q&A, I just wanted to take everyone through just some of the new content that we have added into our apps in the last few months since our last update. So you've seen some examples of these already, so I just wanted to show a few more and then talk about a roadmap a little bit. So some new features in the weather app and the Ag Weather Dashboard include global weather maps. So we have what are called weather signal maps, temperature and precip anomaly maps going forward through the next 6 months using the EC seasonal forecast. I'm going to show some examples of these with some images as well. So I'm just going to read through it real quick. In addition, we have these signal maps at the regional level for the next 4-week forecast and then the next 6 months. 4-week forecasts are updated twice a week from the ECMWF, and the EC seasonal is updated monthly for the next 6 months. We've also added in several maps focused on Japan. So you may have been able to see some of this information already in our kind of broader Asia maps. But I know that we're working towards some additional content in the power space for Japan. So we've made some more Japan-centric maps that you may be familiar with, like model comparisons and then the extended outlook. And then finally, we've made just some structural changes to some of the 4-week outlook pages to add some additional layer of analysis to those. So let me show some examples. This first one is a global signal map that's available in the weather app. And a question did come in, by the way, that I can address really quickly. Accessing the weather app in Icon should be very simple. In the search engine at the top, if you just type in the word weather, I believe it's the second option down, and it'll say cross asset weather. For the agriculture weather dashboard, that one, you simply just type in the initials AWD, so the acronym for agriculture weather dashboard, and it should be the first option that you see. So all of the content that you've seen today is going to be available in either of those apps. Depending on if there's a potential for ag impacts, we've included them in both locations. Some of the maps are located in just the weather app. So that's like this example here. The colors you see on the map, we've called these signal maps, and essentially they represent the general anomalies over time. So if you were to go to this page, it's going to be an EC seasonal loop, and the image will kind of rotate almost like an animated GIF through the next 6 months. So when the screenshot was taken, it shows December, and the colors at the bottom the color scheme at the bottom is explained. So anywhere that you see the brighter orange is going to be a warm bias during December. Anything with green is going to be wet. There's some other, like the slightly different colors like wet and warm is kind of that darker green shading. So once you're familiar with the color coding, it's pretty easy to see where we would anticipate risks based on this particular model output. So there are global maps that show the next 4 weeks and then the next 6 months based on the models that we're pulling in. From those same models, we do also show the individual components. So this is an example of precipitation anomaly probabilities. So in this one is also for December. This is showing the likelihood of above or below normal precip. So the really, really green areas, the ones you see really in like Northern Africa, are highly likely to be above normal. And then areas of the brown color are going to be likely to be drier than normal. So this particular EC seasonal forecast is, again, released once a month, but this would scan through the next 6 months. So let's say, maybe our team hasn't produced a long-range outlook using our own analysis. This is a really good in-between to be able to see what some of our inputs are showing. So when we put together our outlooks, we are using these tools like the EC weekly forecast, the EC seasonal outlooks, the analog analysis. So in addition to our own proprietary information, we have made available a lot of the underlying information that we use. Here's an example of the signal map. This one is for the next 4 weeks based on the EC extended outlook. So again, this one was released on the 14th, which was Monday. There'll be another update to this model later today. This is in the agriculture weather dashboard. It's also, double check if we've added it to the weather app, but you can find it nonetheless. And this really shows over the next 4 weeks on average where the risks really are. So in this case, Brazil looks quite warm and dry. Really, a lot of South America is showing one or the other warm or dry weather. So again, these are really nice little interim updates in between our own proprietary work that you can utilize. And we are including this. This is just an example of South America, but we're showing this across multiple different regions in the world. And you can just use the left-hand navigation to find what you need. I referred to the Japan maps. This is an example of the model comparison pages showing temperature anomalies. So in short, if you're not familiar with these style of pages, it's showing the next 5-day temperature anomalies over the last run of each of the GFS or EC models that we pull in. So it's a nice way to understand if there is consistency across the forecast models. And I also alluded to some updates to our existing pages. So this is from the agriculture weather dashboard, but it shows from left to right temperature anomalies, probabilities of the temperature anomalies, and then precipitation anomalies and probabilities for precip over the next 4 weeks from the EC extended. So this example of Europe is showing the likelihood of warmer and drier than normal conditions, really all the way through mid-October. So again, there's a lot of different ways to look at the information, and what's under the screenshot or below the screenshot is the last model run. So this EC weather outlook is produced on Mondays and Thursdays. So this shows the last 2, so it's really nice to be able to see the comparison. So if you look kind of top to bottom, you can see how that model has been trending and if it's going warmer or cooler. And these are the exact same tools that we're using when we're actually doing our analysis and writing up our reports. We do have a few enhancements in the last couple of months on the weather dashboard only. So we have what are called forecast summary pages for Ghana and Ivory Coast as we continue to expand our offering more into soft commodities. We also have pulled in another soil moisture data source that runs daily. So in the last update, I think we showed that we produced charts for the US, and we've expanded that now into several countries across Europe and Black Sea and Argentina. In addition, we've added growing degree day charts and maps. We started with the US. And then finally, in short, there's a secondary historical weather data set produced by the ECMWF called ERA5. And we have started to bring on historical download files through Download Manager using that particular source for a secondary option for precipitation. So right now we've built out some data files for Argentina, for Russia, and for Vietnam. So a couple of just visual examples. This is an example of the forecast summary chart. These pages show rainfall deviations from normal over the next 10 or 15 days. In the tables that sit below, we've organized the anomaly data based on the top crop producing areas of each of the relevant countries. So they're really helpful to be able to quickly summarize based on crop impacts, not just looking at all of the weather data in a particular country. Also in the Ag Weather Dashboard, this is just an example of the soil moisture data from that new source that we're pulling in. So this is daily data. If you're familiar with our monthly data that's in the standard sort of charts and tables pages in the app, you know, this data is obviously updated more frequently. It's more, you know, time sensitive, whereas the monthly data that we pull in from NOAA, there's a pretty significant time lag. So there's a lot of details in here about where we get the data, how it's different, why it's useful. So I would definitely advocate for taking a look at this if you do have interest in soil moisture. And then finally, well, actually one more thing after this, but we have also added, like I said, GDD charts. So this basically shows how growing degree days have evolved over the course of a given season in the US. You can see out west, they are above normal and to date, and then below normal across quite a bit of the southern and eastern Midwest regions. And finally, just to make you aware, in the weather app, we've updated the navigation a little bit. So with the tropics as heightened as they have been, we just want to make sure it's clear where to find the tropical information. So from the main app, if you click on that summary button, there'll be a drop down, and really anything tropical related is going to be on that tropical page. So you'd want to click that to be able to find what you need. Before, the navigation had been quite extensive across the top. So this sort of partitions off a lot of the tropical content into one section. So also, obviously, if there's a major storm like there was with Sally, we usually try to add in a screenshot of some sort to direct you to that information as well. So, you know, the home page will definitely change, but in case it wasn't clear where to find the tropical information, just wanted to point that out. A little bit on the roadmap real quick. We do expect to continue to work through adding more weather data for soft commodities like coffee and cocoa. Some examples of seasonality charts are coming, as well as weather station data. I mentioned ERA5 as another data set. We will continue to add out download files and maps. GDDs will continue to expand, as well as the daily soil moisture charts into the regions you see listed on the screen now. And then a few other updates. We still intend to add some ensemble mean forecasts to the agriculture weather dashboard. We're also working to add some of the Ag Weather Dashboard pages directly into the agriculture app for some better visibility. So you may start to see, if you're familiar with the main agriculture app and icon, some more of the weather pages that are being pulled in there, just to increase the visibility and make sure that everything is being seen that should be. And then finally, we're working on a new project around weather forecast verification scores. So this should really add some insight into which weather model is performing better than others in different parts of the world. So that's a really exciting one that we're looking forward to putting out there, hopefully in the next few months to some degree. And on cross-asset needs, as I mentioned, ERA5 outputs, we'll have some additional precipitation maps, weather observations, as well as forecasts for the North Atlantic Oscillation. And then there is an important GFS weather model upgrade coming on September 23rd that we are working through. So there should be some improvements to that particular model that we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But just so you're aware, there's an upgrade that's been initiated by NOAA on that one that we're working on as well. And just to close things out before the Q&A, some general information on our commodities research team. I've mentioned obviously weather, but there's quite a few other teams. You can just see the amount of data that we process, the amount of data points and messages and things like that throughout this slide. And as I mentioned, everything is available through these pages directly within Icon. Just a couple of examples within the weather app. Feel free to let us know if you have any questions on that. If you are a user and do have questions on how to find something that we haven't covered in this session, feel free to reach out to us under the Meet the Team section, and we'd be happy to help. And with that, I'll leave it to Q&A.
Great.
Susan,
thank you, Tom. Yes, so we do have, this first question is actually for Isaac. The question is, shouldn't normal precipitation be typically observed in Brazilian Northeast on La Nina years?
All right, great question. Thanks for the question on that. So the question is about Northeast Brazil rainfall and shouldn't it maybe be wetter than what we showed for La Nina years. So I have looked at this, and there are different ways you can look at what typically happens in La Nina. You may have found some publicly available, maybe textbook style graphics that show something like that in Northeast Brazil. However, I just looked back at this. We have looked at it on our own in our ENSO page within Icon. You can see composite maps by season, so it'll break it down to December to February, for example. And if you look at La Nina there, Northeast actually shows, and what we've done there is we've just taken every La Nina year during December to February and averaged the weather together to see what typically happens since about 1980. So it's recent that way. But looking in Northeast Brazil, you actually see dryness kind of similar to what our outlook shows. It's really a weak signal. Frankly, I would say that La Nina is probably not the strongest driver of Northeast Brazil weather. At that time of year, at least, it does show up, ENSO shows up more strongly in other phases for that region, but it's fairly a weak signal for La Nina. That's probably the way that I would interpret that. There's other drivers. There's one that we monitor called the Tropical South Atlantic that at least is used in some of our long-range forecasts. That one shows up as being very important for South America, I think probably Brazil in particular. So there are other factors. Long story short is there's other factors besides ENSO that can contribute to the total picture for a seasonal forecast. And in the case of La Nina, though, I would say overall from the data that we have, it doesn't necessarily give you a strong lean toward high or low rainfall, but we do expect some degree of dryness this year. It'll be an issue to watch in the months ahead.
Great, thanks, Isaac. This next question, I think, is also for you. Is there an observable impact on Russian gas flows from La Nina events?
So that would be just a question about, I would guess, you said gas flows. So this is general, maybe temperature lean on La Nina, temperature and precip. I'm just going to look at Russia overall with a typical La Nina. And I would say it's similar to what I just said about Brazil in the sense that if you look at La Nina overall, or it could be various ENSO phases, but right now we're focused on La Nina. It does not show a strong signal over Russia. It shows a very weak pattern, just looking at all the La Nina events that have occurred since 1980. You see a mixed picture on temperatures typically and a very weak pattern on precip. So I would say La Nina for Russia alone doesn't tell you a whole lot. What's going to swing the weather over there is going to be other factors besides ENSO at this time of year. So the fact that our forecast shows very warm and potentially dry to some extent, that is not coming from ENSO in this case. It's probably from other drivers. There's other things, there's about 50 different drivers that we monitor that could contribute to that. In the long-term sense, the Indian Ocean is important for that region. There's some other things as well. So I would say that would be the answer that I would have on La Nina impact. It's pretty weak there.
Great. Okay, next question. Do you have a history of performance statistics of forecast models, either short-term or long-term, or a way to visualize this performance?
Yeah, Isaac, I can take this one. Actually, this is a really good question. It touches on one of the things we're working on. I would say generally, I mean, the short-term models that we utilize are the GFS from NOAA and the EC from ECMWF, and it's really tough to broad brush, but if we had to, the EC is definitely the better performing short-term model, and that even extends into the longer-term model. So there are the EC seasonal, as we talked about, and then there's another model called the CFSV2 that NOAA produces. The EC, as far as I understand, outperforms the NOAA models. Now, having said that, NOAA is working on upgrades. Like we just talked about the GFS ensemble upgrade. So these things can be in flux, and that's sort of why we are working towards adding verification scores using our own data. So using basically the area average component that when we pull in the forecast data, how we average it across regions in the Ag Weather Dashboard. Really, that's why we're trying to throw in these performance scores so we have a better understanding of that. I would say in general, EC is a better performer, but again, there definitely could be some differences regionally. But the general notion in the meteorological community is that the EC is the better performer. But again, that could change over time. So that's why we're hoping to add more information like that. I'd look for that in the next couple of months to start out. We don't have anything to visualize it at the moment, but I can tell you from experience and from us in the field that it's definitely the EC, and usually that's what we will explain even in our written commentaries, that to focus on this particular model because it has performed better in the last period of time.
Great, thanks, Tom. And then we have one more before we finish. And this I think is for you, Isaac, how will winter look like in the Nordics, taking into account that snow level is still higher than normal?
Yeah, great question there. So the Nordic region, our outlook does favor warmth there. So if they're getting off to a fast start on the snow levels or advancement perhaps, and there's something that we've seen this in a few recent years, and it hasn't always carried over to the winter where we've had some really early snow coverage. This has been true at times in North America and over across Russia as well, that then hasn't necessarily translated into the cold winter. Last year in particular, there was widespread snow cover in Canada and even into the U.S. as early as October, and then it turned out to be a mild winter. And it just kind of depends on how all the factors play together. But right now we do expect a milder winter, similar to a few of the recent years. So nothing fundamental in our view has shifted to change it away from that. Yeah, it's an issue to watch. The snow coverage is important to monitor, and it's a factor, but we don't expect that to be the key driver toward a cold winter. But again, definitely monitor the trends.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Tom. Thank you, Isaac. As we are a little over the hour, we will reach out to you directly if we did not have a chance to answer your questions. Great questions, everyone. Thank you so much. As we said at the beginning, we will email the webinar recording and the slide deck to everyone today, both registrants and attendees. And you'll also see a short survey pop up in a moment. If you could please complete that, we would love to hear your feedback. And with that, this completes the webinar. And stay tuned for future webcasts from our team here at Refinitiv. Thank you so much and have a great day.